3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I'm Chad, and you are on Chewing the Dirt podcast on the right line. And this is episode 4. And today we're doing a little bit of a special podcast because this is a Q&A podcast. And I just happen to have one of my dearest friends with me, Elisabeth. This is actually her idea, by the way. So, Elisabeth, welcome.
Thank you.
First podcast ever?
Ever.
This is the first one you've ever been on?
Yes.
Well, it's fun. Just think of it, like a couple people just having a nice little chill conversation. This is really fun. So I think you had said something about wanting to do a Q&A because there were questions and about off-roading and that sort of thing. And so now here we are. We've got 20 questions, and some of them were submissions from the group and from the channel. And there's some really good ones in here. And I saved, there's a question in here that I answered that's going to make me either very popular or not very popular. So when we get to it, you'll know it right away. Okay. And then the one who wrote that question, he knows who he is. He's going to love this, I think. So this one's for you. So, anyways, well, Sunday. Hey, tell us a little bit about yourself, Elisabeth, because I know you're into Jeeping.
Yep.
And how'd you get into it? And tell us just a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Okay. Well, what I drive now is a 2019 Wrangler JL, 2-door ragtop, and it surprises me with what it can do.
Yeah.
Even when it was basically stock, it really surprised me what it could do.
Yeah.
And I keep building on it and making it more capable.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say that I come from a family who was very into traveling.
Oh, okay.
My grandpa used to have stationery that said like a well-traveled family.
Okay.
It said at the bottom. He was an adventurer. He always went out and took pictures of mostly dams, water dams.
Really?
But he would go out and just explore and take pictures.
Oh, that's cool. Like
Yeah.
Roosevelt, or
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Or
Interesting.
like Hoover and so that my dad sort of picked up on that too, and we would go camping, car camping, truck camping all the time too when I was a kid.
Oh, that's awesome.
So he was always taking us on back logging roads.
Uh-huh.
That whatever back roads he could find, we would be on them, traveling in dirt. Learned the basic ways of off-roading and off-roading etiquette.
Yeah.
Shall we say, old school.
Okay.
And so
All right.
I just have always had that in my blood too. And then my son is also picked up on that. So he's a huge off-roader. He's a 4400.
He's a racer.
He's a racer, 4400 Ultra 4 car racer.
Oh, wow.
So
you can give him a shout out if you want.
Hey, that's Thomas Lou, number 4402.
I've seen your pictures because you had a couple of pictures posted of him on your page.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that's got to be really cool to be I know racing is tough. It's expensive. It's competitive. It's hard.
Yeah,
it's a hard job.
It's a lot of money too.
It's got to be a blast, though.
It is. He took me in the car once at King of Hammers, took me up Chocolate Thunder.
No way.
I thought I was going to die. I couldn't even
that's
scream.
awesome.
I was trying to scream. I couldn't even scream because we were bouncing so hard and going so fast.
That's incredible. That's awesome. I mean, I've seen
That's
Chocolate.
once in a lifetime.
Oh, yeah, no kidding. I've seen those obstacles in videos and stuff. And
They're for real.
I'm like, no, not me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's your entire vehicle going up over a boulder.
Oh, that's awesome. See,
Yeah.
and I have never known that about you, that you'd actually gone up and down, or at least up that trail.
Yeah, I believe it was Chocolate Thunder. It's the one closest to camp.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, yeah, crazy.
Well, kudos to you, and I love it. That's awesome. Okay.
It was cool. Once in a lifetime chance.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. So I know we've been out on several runs together, and I know you love to get out off road.
I do.
And you've done a lot of stuff with your Jeep since you've had it. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
awesome.
a lot of add-ons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now it's going to start getting just a little bit cooler because we're not that far from the fall.
I know.
And so I would love to get out and off-road more, and you and I have talked
Yes.
about doing some trails. So
Yes.
hey,
I'm game.
Okay.
I'm game. It's been a long. I think it's been March since I've been out in the Jeep.
May. For
Yeah.
me, it was May.
Yeah,
So,
and that was Bulldog. That was easy.
but it's out.
It's out. You're
It's
right.
out.
It's
That's
out.
all that
and it's one of my
matters.
favorite places too.
Oh,
Bulldog.
that's just awesome.
So beautiful.
Well, I sort of got started into Jeeping in not quite the same way you did, but sort of similar. And actually, that's a question that we're going to answer today about how I got started with it, because it turned out to be a really, not so much because I wanted to go out and do rock crawling, but it was a purposeful thing of why I got into off-roading, and we'll talk about it here a little bit.
Yeah.
So, okay, you ready for some questions?
Yeah.
All right, there's 20 of them, and we have an hour, and so I'll read the question and I'll start answering them, and then we can chit-chat anything we want about those questions, and as far as we get down those questions, as far as we get. So. Okay, are you ready? Mm-hmm. Oh, and by the way, we have Joseph in the chair over here.
Hi, Joe.
He's kind of watching the cameras. So if anything happens with the cameras, it's his fault.
It's his fault.
Yeah.
Or the dog's.
Okay, so question numero uno is, what is a 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder versus 8-cylinder, and what does that mean, right? So basically, it's talking about the configuration of how the engine is configured, right? So in very basic terms, you can have a single-cylinder engine, and 1-cylinder engine would be like a lawnmower, motorcycle, ATV, even like a gas-powered weed whacker is a single-cylinder engine, just 1 cylinder. So basically you have a cylinder like this, and there is a piston that rides inside this cylinder, and it, just in most simplest basic terms, a piston goes up and down inside the cylinder. There's fuel and air in there. There's a spark that combusts that fuel and air mixture and makes power. So, and then that turns the crankshaft, and it turns that power into rotary. Anyways, that's basically how it works. And you have more than 1 cylinder too, as we're going to talk about. So we have the single cylinder. That's kind of the basics. So, like growing up, we had ATCs and quads and stuff, and they were single cylinder.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Really? Single
cylinder engines, 185 cylinders, CCs, 200 CCs, 250 CCs. Just basically, it's the size of the chamber where that fuel and air is combusted.
The size of the chamber. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Then there's 2-cylinder engines, and 2-cylinder engine would be basically 2 cylinders set side by side, and they both turn and make power. And some examples of that would be like a 2-cylinder jet ski engine, or I actually did some research. I don't know everything about cars. But some examples of who makes a 2-cylinder engine: Volkswagen makes one, Alfa Romeo, Morgan, Suzuki, BMW can make 2-cylinder engines.
For cars.
Cars, yeah. Okay. And then motorcycles as well. There's some, like a Harley V-twin is a 2-cylinder engine.
Wow.
Two cylinders that oppose one another.
Okay.
So there are 3-cylinder engines. Those would be like BMW, Mitsubishi has one in the Mirage. The Toyota Yaris has a 3-cylinder, Mini Cooper, and Toyota Corolla. So 3 of these making power. Okay. Then 4-cylinder engines. That's basically most economical passenger cars these days have those. Everybody makes one. Toyota, Ford, Dodge, Chrysler,
Honda,
Nissan.
everybody.
Well, not so much. Nissan, Toyota, all of them, 4 cylinders.
Yeah.
5 cylinders. There are 5 cylinders, and examples of that would be like the Ford Focus, the Audi Quattro, GMC Canyon, which is, I think it's the same engine that's in the Hummer H3 as well. They have a 5-cylinder engine, and the Chevy Colorado.
I never heard of that. Okay.
Yep. And then we're also going to get into another common one, which is the 6-cylinder. 6 cylinders are just about in everything. Your Jeep has a 6-cylinder.
Yep.
Mine has one. Joseph's has one. And they're all in different configurations. You can have a 6-cylinder inline engine where all the cylinders are in one line, or a V6 where you have 3 cylinders that oppose one another. So that's really common. All other manufacturers have those. So Dodge, Ford, Chrysler, Jeep, if you talk about the Pentastar like what we have, Toyota makes one as well. Common one, because I love the FJ80, would be the 1FZ motor, and then there's a fuel-injected and carbureted version. So there's so many different kinds of variations of how these engines are made and what they do. So, Chevrolet, Nissan, and Toyota also make 6 cylinders as well. So, and then we get to the V8. And
that's my Dodge up there.
Like your Dodge, yeah. And V8s, they're not, I wouldn't say they're not being phased out, but like some manufacturers are not building them as commonly, like the Toyota Tundra.
Is that because of fuel economy?
Well, I'm sure it has to do with federal regulations and fuel economy and all this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
because a lot of these 6-cylinder engines, they can make the same amount of power as a V8 when they have like a turbocharger or a supercharger.
Oh,
So
okay.
I think it was 2001, for example. Jim has a Toyota pickup. His is a V8. After 2001, they quit making the V8 for the Toyota. I think it's 2001.
Yeah.
2021s rather. So they have like a V6 that's turbocharged. So,
Okay.
and again, there's so many different kinds, right? So like with Chrysler V8, you hear about the Hemi.
Yeah.
Hemi V8. There's a 5.7, a 6.1, a 6.2, a 6.4, a 426. Yep. And then Chevrolet has their version of the V8 as well. They talk about LS motors. And there's...
Oh, is that what the LS means on the side when you see like Chevy LS or something?
That'd be like a trim package.
Okay.
LS would be like the generational advances of what Chevy's V8s look like. So,
Okay.
for example, they have, I'm going to read some of these. They have an LS1, LS6, LR4, LM7, LM59, LM4,
Wow.
L33, LQ4, LQ9, LS2, L76, LY6, LY2. I mean, they go on and on and on and on and on. Well, because different brands of General Motors have different configurations for their engines. Like the Yukon's engine might be different than the Silverado's engine might be different, and there's a 4.8 and a 5.3 and a 5.7, and they go on and on and on. So, but that's what the question was, what is 4, 6, and 8 cylinders? That's
Right.
basically what it is.
Okay.
So,
There's a lot more behind that than I realized.
a lot. And the other thing is that there's just so many kinds of engines that, a lot of it's proprietary, and a lot of it is much different. Like the Hemi motors, Hemi engines, like the V8 Hemis will have two ignition coils per cylinder, and an LS might have one. So there's just so many different kinds of variations.
Wow, I had no idea.
Oh yeah. So, all right. Ready for number 2?
Yeah.
Okay. Number 2, what does wheelbase mean, and why do I care? So, wheelbase is the distance between the front and the rear axle, measured from center line to center line, the distance between the two, and where it's important is, I'll read just a couple things off that I wanted to be prepared and just make sure I just spewed out a whole bunch of stuff, so I made a lot of notes. But in any case, shorter wheelbase vehicles like yours and mine compared to a Gladiator pickup, right? Our wheelbases are shorter. The Gladiator is much bigger. Like your pickup out there has got a longer wheelbase.
Yeah.
So shorter wheelbase vehicles tend to be more nimble. They tend to be smaller, of course, a little bit more maneuverable. They tend to have a tighter turning radius, and they can fit in some of the smaller spaces like on trails and on obstacles.
Right.
But they're smaller, so you tend to be able to carry less stuff
Less
with
passengers.
you. Yeah,
less
less
stuff.
passengers.
Yeah.
You can't take your dogs with you. Well, you can,
Right.
but you're really crammed.
They're really uncomfortable.
And compared to a long wheelbase vehicle, the short wheelbases are going to tend to feel more. The long wheelbase are going to tend to feel more stable, like on a climb.
Right. Okay.
A steep climb or a steep descent. Short wheelbase, maybe not quite so much. When I first started driving off-road, and this is another question we'll talk about here in a minute, I was in the Jeep YJ, a Wrangler.
Yeah.
Short wheelbase,
I used to have
just
a
like
YJ.
ours. Yep.
Yep.
And when I first started off-roading, I hated steep climbs. If it was steep, I didn't want any part of it. And I had a short wheelbase Jeep, so it felt terrible.
Like I'm gonna go over one way or another.
Oh, yeah, anyway, it didn't matter because it
Yeah.
just feels so not quite as stable as in like a long
Sure.
wheelbase, like a four-door Jeep or a Gladiator.
Yeah.
So some locals might understand, locals to Phoenix and in the area might know the trail Spare Tire Canyon.
Never heard of it.
It's a super tight canyon.
ATV size trail.
No, I got my LJ, my first Rubicon was an LJ. I got that through there, and it's kind of a long wheelbase.
Yeah.
I got that through there. It's tight. I mean,
Yeah.
rubbing wheels going through.
Really? So it's an actual canyon.
Yeah, it's slot canyon, really, really
Nice.
tight. but the short wheelbase could have just gone right through there. So think of like a CJ2A, which is a tiny little Jeep compared to Jim's Gladiator.
Right.
Right, much
So
bigger.
if you wanted to go around a rock,
smaller the better,
hence
more nimble
the spare
anyway.
tire.
Yeah. So, a couple other things is that one thing that an example that I gave was the LJ, or that I wanted to talk about was the Jeep LJ. So prior to that, we had the Jeep TJ, which is like Joe's Jeep, just that real short wheelbase, two-door Wrangler. And people wanted to take their dogs places. They wanted to take their family places. They wanted to take gear and other stuff. And with those just tiny little two-doors, there wasn't enough room.
You can have the back seat, and there's about 2 feet behind the back seat.
Exactly. So they built the LJ, which was, I think it was like 2 feet longer.
Oh,
so it was a long wheelbase.
But still two-door?
Wrangler, two-door, yep.
Wow.
And the wheelbase for that LJ was 103-ish inches, and the TJ's wheelbase was 93 inches. So quite a bit different.
Yeah.
And then, of course, then we have the two-door JK, two-door JLs, four-door JKs, four-door JLs. So longer wheelbase. Like my two-doors wheelbase is 95 inches, and the four-door is about 116. So that's just
a big difference.
It is, but it means you can take more junk with you.
I know. I know. See, I used to have a Tacoma before I had this Jeep.
Yeah.
And I was always afraid of turtling on a rock, which I had done before going up the back way up to Crown King. You know, I got up the first part over the boulder and then wham, down on the center.
Yeah.
You know, and I thought, I can't do this. I put the protection underneath, and I still thought, I want to be more nimble. I want to be able to get over that boulder, like boom, boom, not wham.
Coming down on it really hard.
Yeah.
Well,
so that scared me. So I sold the Tacoma because of that and got the shorter wheelbase.
Yeah, it's not a bad choice.
But yeah, less room, a lot less room.
Yeah, you're fighting for space.
Yes.
I've had so many people joke with me telling me that I should win the award for cramming the most amount of crap in the back
Seriously.
of a Jeep.
You should teach people how to cram as much stuff.
That's not a bad idea, actually.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like doing a closet, you know?
There you go.
You can teach people how to strategically
Packing it. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I'd be interested in that.
That's great. We'll have to come up with something. I think that might be a bad idea.
Yeah.
One other thing you can think about with a short wheelbase versus long wheelbase is something called breakover angle.
Okay.
So breakover angle has to do, if you think of the side profile of a vehicle, if you're looking at the side profile and you see both tires, and then draw imaginary lines from the front of the rear tire and the back of the front tire straight up to the center of the vehicle, it creates an angle.
Yeah.
And that angle is affected by wheelbase and height. It's called the breakover angle. So if you were thinking about a lowrider, for example, going through a parking lot and speed bumps, their breakover angle is terrible.
0.
So they go over a speed bump and then they get kind of
hit.
turtled on a speed bump.
Yeah.
Same thing off-road with us.
Right.
So I think that's a lot of reasons why a lot of four-door Jeep owners are now on big lifts and big tires.
Right, because it gives you that height.
Yeah, it helps to kind of improve the breakover angle.
Yeah.
So they're 37s, 39s, 38s, and 40-inch tires. That's huge, but it helps with their breakover angle.
I never heard that term before.
Breakover angle?
Yeah.
Yeah. Breakover angle, approach angle, and departure angle, they're all kind of talked about at the same time. Approach angle is the angle that's created from the front of the front tire going up to the bumper, and the back of the rear tire going up to the bumper. And the steeper those angles are, that means you have less real estate, less vehicle in front of the tire. So you're less likely to hit the tire to the obstacle first. You're going to hit like a bumper.
Okay.
Right? So on our Jeeps, for example, versus a Cadillac.
Right.
Cadillac has a lot of car in front of the
It's going to hit
bumper
whatever first, the bumper first.
Same in the back. So
right.
The more you have hanging off the back, the worse your departure angle.
Because when you leave, you're like wham down on the rock with your bumper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I like that question. That's a good one because wheelbase is important. I don't think people really think a lot about that, but
I didn't before, but now I do.
Well, I mean, and people want to take more stuff with them. When we go, they want to take camping gear, they want to take their dog, they want to take the family, and all this kind of stuff. And the longer, the bigger the vehicle, the more they can take. So
yeah, unless you go up. which is hard to do with a rag top. With a
Yeah.
hard top, it's easier. I think you can put a
Yeah.
rack on the top.
Yeah,
But
roof rack.
with the rag top, if you ever want to put it back, it goes up high,
Yeah.
before it comes back down.
Right.
So you can't just,
The roof rack, roof rack that I had on my two-door, I had to build that so that it would pivot up in the front or in the back, so I could pull the
Oh,
top
that's a
off, or
good
I could pull
call.
the freedom panels off.
yeah.
But-
Is that something that could be made for a rag top, do you think? Like
Oh, yeah.
something you could,
Yeah.
keep the back attached to the Jeep and just sort of pull it back like you would a rag top?
Yeah, mine was built where I could take the bolts out of the back and I could lift the roof rack all the way up,
Okay.
and I could hold it up and then take like the back of the hard top off if I wanted, then set it back down. It's just
Okay.
it's kind of hard to do with one person. You got to have to have.
Oh, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So. All right, so that's a good one. You ready for number 3?
Yeah.
All right, so this one's really good too. This one is what are lockers and locking differentials?
Yeah.
So first we got to talk about what the differential is, and then we'll talk about open differentials first, because then we can compare the two. So in the axles, between the left and right tires is the differential. And if we're thinking about the rear axle, it's often in the center. And you have some gears in that differential housing, and then from the left and to the right to the wheels are the axle shafts. That's what drives the tires, drives the wheels.
Okay.
And then from the front of the axle is the torque or the energy coming from the engine, transmission, drivetrain coming back. So the torque comes in from the front of that differential housing, and it turns what's called a pinion shaft.
Okay.
And the pinion shaft spins or drives the ring gear, which it's all part of just people would refer to it as a differential. So you have the
Is that
ring.
also the pumpkin?
Yeah, the pumpkin is just like
Is
slang
it just
for
because it's a round
yeah.
thing? It looks like a pumpkin.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
I've heard it called both.
I don't hear of pumpkin too much anymore, but
Yeah.
that's just common slang for the differential.
Okay.
So, now why the differential is important is because if you're going down a straight line, if you're traveling in a straight path, either forward or back, think of the left and right tires basically spinning the same speed. They're going at the same rate as long as you're going straight.
Yeah.
But when you make a turn,
Right. This one's doing more.
the outside tire has to travel farther,
Yeah.
and it has to spin at a different speed compared to the one on the inside of the turn.
This one could almost stay stable, and then as you go,
Yeah.
a lot slower than this one.
If you think about a wheelchair, for example, if you were sitting in a wheelchair and you held the right wheel so it didn't turn,
Yeah.
and you pushed the left wheel,
Right.
they both obviously are turning at different rates. The outside wheel is turning faster, so you have to have that differential in speed, or otherwise you've got all kinds of drive characteristics are terrible. It's hard on parts and everything, but
Yeah.
the differential, think of it as meaning you have to have that ability to have a differential in speed as you're turning corners.
Okay.
So an open differential is where that's exactly what it is. You have the differential in the middle. There's in an open differential, there's no real way of making sure that the tires are spinning the same rate. When we get to lockers, it'll make more sense.
Yeah.
But so you have to be able to turn the wheels at different speeds. Now, when you get to a locker is a way of basically locking both axle shafts together so they are spinning at the same speed
time.
no matter what. When
So
the lock,
one tire could be off, in the air,
yeah,
and it's still going to go the same rate as the one that's
as the other one.
on the ground.
Yeah, so like with an open differential, if you're driving on a trail and let's say your passenger side rear tire falls down into a hole and it's really low traction there, then
Yeah.
that wheel is just going to spin out of
Spin.
control,
Right.
while the left one is just hanging out because
Yeah.
that power is going right to the wheel with the least amount of traction, least friction.
Okay.
Now with a locker, and lockers can be electric, they can be cable driven, they can be air driven, they can be locked in, or sometimes they're automatic, where if you're going in a straight path and you're applying power, they're locked. when you go around a corner, they unlock. But in any case, basically, it's a way of locking both axles together so they're spinning at the same rate. So when that passenger side tire falls down into a hole and you lose traction, both tires, both wheels are still getting the same amount of torque.
Okay.
And that's what pulls you through an obstacle. So,
and is it better to have a front locker or a rear locker?
Well,
if you had to choose.
Well, that's a debate a lot of people would have. If you buy a Rubicon, for example, you get front and rear lockers.
Right.
I think you installed a rear locker in yours.
Yes.
But you don't have one in the front, right?
Correct.
But you got a winch.
Yes.
So, I mean, having a front locker is definitely helpful for certain things like climbing ledges.
Okay, yeah.
Where you want to be able to
Sure.
get up over the top of a ledge, it's nice.
Got
But
it.
having a front locker also has some pretty negative drive characteristics too. For example, when both axle shafts are locked together, there's no differential in speed. Well, think about that in the front, because now when you make a turn, both tires have to spin at different speeds, but they also have to turn left or right. So it makes it
Right.
really hard to turn, because now you're,
If the locker's engaged.
because it's forcing both wheels to go the
go the
exact
same
same
speed.
speed,
That
and
could be
that's hard
scary.
to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, lockers in the front are nice. I have one on my Rubicon. I use it. I don't use it as much as I use the back.
Yeah.
What's nice about it is being selectable. You can turn it on, turn it off.
Right.
So
Yeah.
when you're
my adjustments are on the handlebar.
easy,
so it's
right?
Easy.
You just
Bing.
hit them.
Yeah.
So if you're locked on a trail and you're trying to crawl through an obstacle, as
Yeah.
soon as your front wheels clear the obstacle and you have to turn, unlock it.
Oh.
So it allows you to turn and then still be able to move.
Wow.
So
There's a lot of strategy.
there is thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's lockers which are, I lock both axles together, 100% they are locked. But there's other things called limited slip differentials. They are not lockers, but they're what we call traction aids, where
Like it assists you as you're.
yeah, exactly. So instead of that rear wheel falling into that hole and losing traction because you don't have a locker, if you had a limited slip differential in there, then it will, I'm trying to make this as just basic as I can, is
Yeah.
that it will sort of flirt with distributing power, like on
And you're in control of that?
well, not really. Most of the limited slips are something you can't really control, like they're clutch driven by the unit inside the differential, or they're gear driven by the unit inside the differential, so you really can't like turn it on and turn it off.
Okay.
I think there was one version that was made by Auburn, and it was called the ECTED, and it was something that was clutch driven electrically. You would turn it on, and it would basically sandwich some clutch discs together so that they were really, really tight, and it acted like a locker.
Oh,
But it could be broken. In other words, you could have some slip, hence the limited slip.
Limited slip. Okay.
So, but that's something else. And many companies make lockers. Detroit makes lockers. The factory ones have lockers. My Grand Cherokee had factory limited slip differentials in the front, rear,
Yeah.
and in the transfer case. It was it was a different beast altogether. But and then of course you start talking about things like traction control and how all those work, and then that's a whole rabbit hole you can go down.
Right. That's a whole another episode.
Oh yes.
Right.
So, but that's how lockers are really helpful, because then I can say, I want traction now.
Yeah.
Because if you're looking at an obstacle and you can just sort of tell that I think I'm going to lose traction there because
Right.
it's muddy, or because that one's got dirt on it,
Yeah.
slippery, then I can lock those lockers and then I've got drive.
I used it the last time we were at the cleanup at Four Peaks.
Yeah.
We went down that really steep embankment down to where we were picking up garbage.
Yeah, off to the right. I remember that one.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I looked at it going up. I'm like, oh, crap. Right. So I'm like, okay, now's the time to try out those lockers.
Yeah.
And it just crawled up there like it was nothing.
Yeah. And there's nothing really wrong with just using it just in case you
Yeah,
need
just
it.
in case. I
It's-
didn't want to go flying back down
Right.
because there were still people at the, I didn't know what was going to happen. It was very steep.
Well,
to
and
me.
if you're on something that's really steep and you had a failed hill climb
Yeah.
because you didn't have enough traction.
Right.
Locking it at the bottom and using it is better than having to stop halfway on the hill and roll
then
back down
engage it.
and
Yeah.
do it again.
Right.
And some of those lockers are a bit persnickety. If you're in a certain situation, if you were, let's say you're in a turn in an obstacle and you're trying to lock the locker,
Yeah.
it may not lock right
Really?
away, because if the mechanics of the inside of it don't line up just specifically, it won't
Okay.
lock. So if
Okay.
you're in the middle of a
Is that
turn or
like
something,
this kind of thing where it doesn't engage?
some of them, yeah, like
Can't get.
some of them are like that. Like some of the auto lockers, they're basically 2 gears and they have
Yeah.
to mesh
They have
together
to
like that
mesh,
to lock.
Yeah. Instead of.
Yeah, exactly. So they're fun. I mean, they have to be. You have to learn how to use them.
There's a lot more strategy involved, I think, than I thought or people might think that aren't
Yeah.
really into off-roading. I think there's a lot of driving strategy,
Yeah.
not just what you have installed on your Jeep, or your off-road vehicle, but
Yeah. Since some of it just comes from having some trail time.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
And following good people,
Yeah. Last night, for example, when we did that night run on Elvis, that's a video coming up, by the way.
You ran Elvis last
We did.
night? Wow.
There's just a few of us. It wasn't a huge group, but
Yeah.
we went out and ran as a night run,
Nice.
and it is a good one. It's kind of a moderate to difficult run depending on what lines you take, but
Yeah.
in some points in the video we're talking about make sure you're using your lockers. Turn that locker on, turn that locker off, because you could just
Yeah.
foresee or predict where you might lose some traction and you want to have it on. Some people are just on, and they go.
Yeah.
And that helps until they want to turn. So
Right. And you're like,
yeah, you're right. It's a strategy, learning how to use them.
yeah.
So some of it's just learned by experience. You try an obstacle,
Right.
you lose traction. Maybe I should have turned the locker on.
Right. And I
So-
remember the last time I did this, right, this worked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Ready for the next one?
Yeah.
All right, next one. What is a Dana 30 axle versus something else, and why do I care?
Yeah.
So axles they're basically built in different models, if you think about it. Some of them are for light duty trucks and some of them are for really heavy duty trucks.
Okay.
So for example, you'll hear of a Dana 30 versus a Dana 44 or Dana 35, Dana 60 or Dana 80, whatever.
Right.
But the Dana 30 is basically a light duty axle for 4-wheel drives.
That's like your stock axle.
Yeah.
I think mine
yours
has
has
a
a Dana
30.
30.
Yeah, on the front.
Yep.
And I think it's a 40 in the back, but I'm not.
Probably a
I couldn't tell you.
44 in the back.
44.
Yep. So I'll go through just some examples of how they're different. So for example, the Dana 30 is a front axle, and
Sorry. Fire alert.
That's all right. Its predecessors that came before it were like the Dana 23, the Dana 25, the
Oh.
Dana 27. They're just
Okay.
smaller axles.
Like a light duty truck or light duty car or something?
Light duty 4-wheel drives, and some of the older Jeeps had smaller axles just because they were smaller vehicles and lighter weight.
Yeah.
Dana 30 is often compared to the bigger brother, which is the Dana 44.
And what does the 30 and 44 refer to? Is that a circumference? Is that
Well,
what is the 30 and 44?
it's basically, and somebody is probably watching this is screaming, the 30 means this especially.
I'm sure. I'm dumb.
No,
Sorry.
no. The 30 is like the model number, but where they differ are
Okay.
things like size of components. So the Dana 30's components are smaller than the Dana 44's components. So,
Okay.
for example, the Dana 30's ring gear diameter is 7 inches in diameter,
Okay.
and the Dana 44's, and there's variations to that, so it's kind of an ish, but basically 7 inches, where the Dana 44's ring gear diameter is 8.5 inches.
So they're capable of more, stronger,
Well, they're bigger.
bigger.
They're bigger. Some of them are, now, there's multiple different ways of talking about this when you start talking about ring and pinions and which one's bigger, which one's smaller. So we're not going to go down that rabbit hole, but basically bigger components, bigger, we'll talk about spline counts too, more spline counts,
Yeah.
thicker materials, heavier duty materials. And so to have a comparison, the Dana 30's ring gear is 7 inches, the Dana 44's ring gear is 8.5, and the Dana 60's ring gear is 9 3/4.
Okay.
So bigger axles, bigger components, theoretically they could take more oomph.
Yeah.
They can take more. They're just stronger.
Okay.
The other thing to think about is with bigger components are like the axle shafts for these things. They're bigger, they have more spline counts. So the Dana 30's front axle spline counts is 27. The Dana 44's spline count is 30. So if you think about, I guess the more basic way to think about it is to think about looking in the center of a clock, and all the numbers around the clock represent a spline, or basically
Okay.
a ridge built on the spline.
Got it.
And then think about a shaft that has 27 of those all the way around.
Okay.
And then you have one that's got one that's 30, and
Okay.
sometimes they get even really bigger, like some of the Dana 60s are 35 spline. And bigger, there's 40 splines too, right? So there's lots of variation. But the bigger the shaft, the more spline counts it have, the stronger it is, the more surface area that you have between spline counts on the end of the shaft and the side gear that it slides into, like the spider gear. So bigger, better, more spline counts. And so the Dana 30 is kind of like the stock light duty axle. 44 is a little bit heavier. 60 is even heavier yet. So that's kind of a way to think about it. See if I really got any other notes in here, but
Well, for example, a lot of people ask, what's the biggest tire I could put
Oh,
on
yeah.
my, so like, could a Dana 30 handle 37s
yeah,
or 38s, or like,
yeah.
how much can I expect from the Dana 30 in the front?
A lot of it depends on what you're going to use the vehicle for and what your driving style is like.
Well, let's assume we're going off-roading and like some boulders, some,
Yeah.
rough trail.
Well, I'll give you an example. If you remember our friend Mike who moved to Wyoming,
Yes.
he has an LJ and he has a Dana 30 in the front and a Dana 44 in the back, and he's running 38s. Mike, you're going to correct me, I'm sure. He's running 38-inch tires, 38-inch tires,
Yeah.
but he's done some upgrades to that axle where he is. You start talking about trusses and sea gussets and sleeving. Those are all things that are meant to make the material thicker, stronger, or whatever. But as I recall, he did some upgrades where he went from that 27 spline to a 30 spline to make it stronger, and he's
Yeah.
running a bigger tire.
Yeah.
So you could, and he's not one that he's not going to abuse his junk. He's not one that's going to go hog wild spinning tires and then wait for something to go snap.
Right.
So he's a conscientious
Yeah.
driver. Now,
Yeah.
think about Rick on the other hand.
Or Mike.
Just kidding, Rick.
Just kidding, Mike, not.
Rick has got Dana 44s front and rear.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
As far as I know, they're all stock. I don't think he's done much change to them except
Is that
for
right?
ring gears, differential gears, but he's running 40s.
Yeah.
Now, Rick is a very conscientious driver. He doesn't beat his stuff up like, he's not into this real wild wheel spin and then waiting for something to go snap when it instantly gets traction. So, so yeah, you could fit a huge tire on a small axle, and you can drive that until something
Until it breaks.
fails, and then you know what to fix. You know what to upgrade.
True.
So, like on your Dana 30, for example, on your Jeep, I don't think there's any reason why you couldn't go any more than a 37. But that just means that your driving style can't be crazy wheel
Well,
speed.
I've never been that crazy.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a super cautious driver. I'm never
Yeah.
going to go, like, balls to the wall and try to climb, a boulder or something. But,
Well,
like,
but
if
you might one day.
I might one day. But, like, I'm at the point where my tires are coming up on 6 years old.
Yeah,
They've chunked out. I could replace them.
yeah,
I know I don't want to stick with 35s, but I want to get the biggest tire that I can under
Yeah.
there. But I don't want other shit to break because,
right,
because I'm trying to look cool with, bigger tires.
right. Well, I guess the one thing to remember about everything mechanical is that if it was built by a human, it's gonna break.
It's going to break.
no matter what. How fast it breaks depends on how
your
it's
driving.
used.
Yes.
I would say, and this is my opinion, and everybody else is going to have a different opinion as well. For a Dana 30 or the Dana 44, I think 37, and this is actually something, one of the other questions was how big a tire can I fit on such and such an
Right.
axle. I think 37s are about the max that I would want to go on a Dana 30 or a Dana 44.
Really? Okay.
Dana
Even the
30 is
44.
going to require some upgrades probably, but it's also going to depend on your driving style, right? So
you've driven with me enough to know that I'm not the crazy daring driver.
Yeah, I think that you would be fine on 37s with your driving style. There's times when you're in obstacles on trails where you know that wheel is going to get in a bind and it's going to have more load or more stress, something's going to break, let's stop and reposition.
Yeah.
Those are just things you think about while you're driving, especially with the hardware that you have. So
yeah, maybe we could take this offline and have a discussion about that.
Oh yeah,
separately.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think so. That was pretty much. So I think that's all I had for basically the Dana 30 versus 44.
Okay.
They just think of the Dana 30 light truck, light vehicle. Dana 40 a little bit heavier. Dana 60 a bit heavier. And like you might see a lot of folks on social media, Instagram, or what have you, that are putting in Dana 60 axles, Dana 80 axles, huge axles, but they're also running 39s, 40s, 42s, big tires.
Yeah.
But it's because they need the bigger hardware.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And then, so kind of tying into that, the next question is, what does it mean to regear and why? So we talked about the differential and pinion gear. Okay, so let's take, for example, a stock-ish kind of light truck duty ratio, which is 3.73 to 1. So basically what that means is for every one turn of the wheels, the drivetrain has to turn 3.7 times.
Okay.
And think of it as like a torque modifier. It's a mechanical advantage. So if you had a 3.73 gear, which would be like in a daily driving pickup that you would take down the road, but now you're going to add big tires, heavy bumpers, skid plates. You're going to take a lot of gear.
That's
now
a lot of weight.
You got more weight. You're kind of losing some mechanical advantage because now you have to work harder to spin all of that stuff. You have to work harder to get all of that working. So you would change those differential gears to get more mechanical advantage.
Okay.
So maybe a 373 now becomes a 410, or a 4.56, or a 4.88, or a 5.13, or a 5.38. Those are all common differential gears for our Jeeps. So that, like a 538 would mean for every one turn of the tire, the drivetrain has to turn 5.38 times. So it's like just basically increasing the mechanical advantage.
Okay.
But it's got downsides. So if you increased your mechanical advantage with a numerically higher gear, that's great for getting started or crawling over an obstacle, but that means you also might tend to lose some of your top end speed or your drivability on the highway.
Oh, okay. Even if you're not in four-wheel drive, you're just going down the road.
Because that also means your engine's going to be turning a bit faster.
Working harder.
Yeah. So with gear changes,
Okay.
that's basically what that means. You add all this weight, you add all these big tires, you add all this extra stuff, and now you're losing some of the mechanical advantage, so you have to change that gear ratio to get it a little better.
So at what weight, I feel like I've added a lot of weight to my Jeep just with the bumpers, the tires. To me, the winch is even heavy.
Yeah.
Like, at what point would you consider re-gearing because of the weight you've added? At what weight would you?
So think of a good example. I think was having kind of a conversation with Jim about this. Jim's got that new JT pickup.
Yeah.
His automatic transmission has 8 speeds. So
Wow.
if he's on the highway or climbing up, let's say, to Flagstaff on his 37-inch tall tires, he may have a tendency to not get to 8th gear.
Sure.
Especially
increase in elevation.
Especially if there's a load. If he's towing or he's going uphill or what have you.
Okay.
He may not have the tendency to get into that 8th gear.
Yeah.
So if he re-gears that Jeep to get more mechanical advantage, he may regain that 8th speed.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
Most people would say, oh, I love my Jeep. I put on those big tires and now it's gutless. I feel like I don't have any power. I feel like I can't make it go like it used to.
Right.
And then that's when they re-gear.
Okay.
Different differential gear.
Okay.
So, and then the next question was, what is the biggest tire I can put on my Jeep?
Right. Most common question in off-roading.
Yeah, there is a ton more to consider other than just size and what physically fits is important too, but
Yeah.
also thinking about with bigger tires, that's more weight, that's more stress and strain. That means what do I have to change on my steering to make that stronger? What do I have to change in the suspension to make sure I have enough lift to support that big tire so I don't have rubbing?
Right.
With wheels, how far outward does the wheel have to go so that the tire doesn't rub when I turn?
Okay.
So that's another consideration, lift and that sort of things.
And who do you ask these things of? You certainly wouldn't go to Discount Tire and ask them this.
No, it would have to be like a trusted four-wheel drive shop, or if you're a part of a club. So if you go out on a run with your friends and you notice that your tires are rubbing in the back, somebody's going to go, yeah, well, I went up to 37s too, and I had to trim that pinch seam back there. I had to flatten that pinch seam so it didn't rub.
Okay.
Or I ended up having to add a half an inch of spacer to get a little more height or something. So,
right. Okay.
Some of that stuff that just kind of gets passed around. And if you go on any forum or any group on Facebook, somebody's going to ask, how much tire can I put on a such and such a vehicle?
Well, you guys wouldn't know this, but for women going on there and asking questions, and they know you're a girl, then there's a different attitude towards women asking questions in off-roading forums. Yeah, I've noticed.
Yeah,
I mean, most of the guys in clubs are guys. There's only a couple of us women in the club, and
yeah,
it's hard for women to ask questions.
A little more intimidating.
It's very intimidating.
Yeah,
and it kind of you feel stupid asking because you feel like this is stuff you should know. If you're going to run with the boys, you should know what the boys know.
Well, I think a lot of people. Some people know what they don't know, or they don't know what they don't know, and that's where they ask questions. And I would say, I don't think anybody should feel bashful about asking questions. And if anybody does give you a hard time about something simple like a question that may seem very hard question for you to ask as something that might be very basic, but I don't think anybody should ever give anybody a hard time about asking questions.
There's
especially
a lot of ego
if you're
out
learning.
there.
Of course there is. Part of that becomes if you get into a really good club or people that you trust them, they have knowledge, or even better yet, if you are in a club and you've met somebody that specifically that person, that you trust them, take them aside and maybe ask them. Yeah. It is kind of a bummer when somebody asks a question and they get roasted on social media about something. Right. It is kind of a bummer, but it does happen. Yeah. So. Yeah, that's why I've found you super helpful, because you don't judge me. If we laugh, we're laughing together. Oh, yeah. But you've taught me so much, just in driving and things like questions like these. Well, somebody did that for me. Yeah. When I was younger. Yeah. And believe it or not, that was a question that we're going to ask her. Oh. But somebody did that for me at one point, and I just feel that you just pay it forward. You just help the next person out. Why not? Yeah. You're all there to have fun. So. Right. Be kind, have fun. Yeah, exactly. Okay, the next question I think we kind of covered, but it was, do I need different axles if I put bigger tires? Right. They're all kind of part of the same question. Yeah. We talked about the components being bigger, components being stronger. Mm-hmm. You can change those things and make them stronger when you start adding weight, bigger tires, and that kind of stuff. And sometimes it's just a matter of when you're with your club or you're with your group, you listen to their conversations. What did I do to make this fit? Or this broke, what did I do to fix it? What did I do to upgrade it? Yeah. And those are all good things to learn. When you break stuff, that's generally where you learn where the weak spots are. Right. People will talk about what's the fuse in my drivetrain. They'll talk about they have something that's built into the drivetrain that is the weak link because it's the cheaper to fix. Oh, okay. So, start with the cheapest. Yeah, right. Like a U-joint is much easier to fix than replacing ring gears and differentials. Is that right? Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, Number one, everything is super expensive these days.
Yeah.
Labor is super expensive
Oh
these
my
days.
gosh. It is.
And some of these parts are just, if you know that you have something that is, you feel like that's going to break first, that's your fuse. That's what you think is going to break first, the cheaper part.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. I wrote something down that we can kind of talk about here. Oh, I already actually covered this. This was talking about tire size and component stuff, so we've already done that. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Can I put my vehicle into 4 high or 4 low while I'm stopped? And sometimes yes, you can. You might get lucky. And sometimes no. So I think the prudent technique when you're trying to shift your transfer case is to be rolling slightly. We're talking like half a mile an hour.
Rolling in neutral?
Well, so you're going to, it takes practice, right? So for example, if I'm rolling up to an obstacle and I know I want to put my Jeep in 4-wheel drive, I'm going to be rolling slightly at maybe a half a mile an hour, and put the automatic transmission in neutral, take the 4-wheel drive shifter, pull it into 4 low, and then put the automatic back in drive. Mm-hmm. And it's really a matter of getting gears to line up.
Right.
And if they're not lined up, they're gonna do that, or they won't engage until you're moving.
Yeah.
And if you just happen to stop where they're not quite where they should be, and you try to shift, you may not get in it.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah. So I always tell everybody, you need to be going a half a mile, maybe a mile. I mean, just very slow, just enough to get the drivetrain moving where you can pull that shifter down and shift it.
So try to anticipate before you get to that place where you know you're going to have to go into 4-wheel.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So
I've had a spot where I got stuck in the sand and I couldn't move.
Yeah.
And so I had to force it into 4-wheel drive low, stuck in the sand. And it was probably just fortunate that, things were in alignment, that it actually worked.
That it just happened to go.
Right. I was out at Bulldog, got stuck in the sand.
Yeah. It does make it easier when you can just push that gear, push the lever right in there. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Coilovers, what are they?
Yes.
So a coilover is a combination of a shock absorber and a coil spring.
So the actual metal springs you see.
Yeah.
With a shock in the
the center of a coilover is a shock, basically a gas charged shock, and then on the outside of that shock are coils.
So the coil over means the coil is over the shock.
Yeah, basically. And the two coils are not the same. Most often they have different rates.
There's 2?
Yeah, there's one on the top, one on the bottom. They're separated by basically a ring. Okay. And one coil rate is going to be different than the other coil rate. So one coil rate might be for driving at higher speeds, and the next coil rate might be for off-roading. So you can put a heavier coil spring on and the lighter coil spring. And there's all kinds of different ways of figuring out which one's which. I mean, it's a science. If you ask a shop, or like your son, for example, he's probably got coilovers on his race car.
Oh, I'm sure.
If you ask him about that, he'll tell you there's things to consider like shock tuning, changing coil rates, and when the shocks get more complicated, they really get more complicated.
Yeah.
When you start thinking about what's the fluid doing and where's the ride zone and the compression rate and the rebound rate, and it's just really, really complicated. But
so if you're really into off-roading or racing, you're going to get very into that.
Oh yeah.
Right?
But for us, like you and I, we have a separate coil spring and a separate shock absorber.
So they're not in the same.
Nope. Yeah, they're two completely different, separate things.
Okay.
But they can make coilovers are nice because they have abundant adjustability. You can adjust ride height with them.
Yeah.
You can adjust, again, the coil rates, which coil rate you want. You can adjust. I'm probably going to get the name wrong on it, but there's what's called a timing ring on it. They're adjustable rings where you can basically tune. You can tune where one coil spring starts and the next coil spring ends, or where one ends and one starts. So if it makes sense, where if you're driving down the highway the one coil spring is taking the load and the shock absorption and everything else, but you use these time rings where you can tell it, okay, at this point I want this coil spring to stop working, and now I want this one to start working.
Oh, wow.
And I know my explanation is just completely rudimentary. I don't play with coilovers, so the scientific part of it is I'm not there. But basically, that's the whole point. Is the coilovers are just abundantly adjustable. You can do all kinds of things with them. And
I had no idea.
Oh yeah, and they can have different amounts of travel: 12 inches, 14 inches, 16 inches of travel, 10 inches of travel. So they're pretty cool. They really are. They're also very expensive too.
Yeah, but
So, yep. Okay, so what is independent front suspension versus a straight axle? So the easy way to talk about this is our Jeeps have a straight axle in the front. They call it, or a live axle.
live axle?
Yep.
Okay.
Just think of it as straight axle. That might just be the simplest way, because just compare it to IFS. So
Yeah.
independent front suspension is often called IFS.
Yeah.
But with a solid axle like what we have, anything that happens to the left wheel is going to affect the right wheel. So if I'm going off-roading and one tire is going up over an obstacle, this tire is going down.
Down. Okay.
Or vice versa. With IFS, for example, they're independent of one another. So this tire might be going down into a hole, and this one is staying perfectly where it was.
Is it going to look like, rather, straight axle is here, right?
Yeah.
Independent front suspension is going to look more like this?
Ish.
And they're independent of each other?
Well,
Ish?
in a IFS, in both circumstances, like with our Jeeps, you have control arms. The control arms look a little different. In IFS, they are more triangular shape. Basically, they have to support the steering and the front bearing and some of the drive components, like the drive shafts there. But they move independent of one another. So one tire can travel up or down, and the other one doesn't do anything.
Okay. So what's the advantage of one versus the other?
The advantages are the ride quality or comfort might tend to be better with IFS vehicles. Ground clearance is also a benefit with an IFS car, because now you don't have that differential hanging down below.
Yeah.
And they're tunable and adjustable just like everything else. They can also be two-wheel and four-wheel drive too. I think the big major advantage of it is like ride quality. But the big advantage of it is that one wheel can operate independently of another during their suspension cycles. So they do feel a little different when you're off-roading.
I bet. Yeah.
But that tends to be the big thing. I think for notes-wise, that's basically all I had really got. I had mentioned in that, but they can be fully upgradable and adjustable, and they can be made to be stronger. So there's a big market for upgrading all of that stuff.
I bet.
The other tendency is with a live axle, where like with our straight axles, you have the differential, and then from the differential are our axle shafts, and on the end of that axle shaft is either a universal joint or a CV joint. Well, since the suspension travels up or down this way with a straight axle versus the IFS car, on an IFS, the axle looks a little different. It has to travel on both sides because it can droop or go up. It can go up or down, but it has to have travel on both sides. So from the differential, there will be a CV joint and then a shaft and then another CV joint, so that there's travel on both sides. So they'll often call them half shafts, but that's really the big difference. And those half shafts there's no axle tube with an IFS, so they're outside. So there's a differential and then a shaft and then the knuckle bearing hub, all that outside. So that's really the big difference between the two. So there's a lot more questions, but I want to just cover these last two. And these were submissions too. This one, what was your first car? How many vehicles have you owned? And what got you into off-roading, and who inspired you to get into it? So I first started driving, my first vehicle that I ever bought was a 1980 Ford Fiesta.
Oh, I always wanted one of those.
Not this one.
It's like the tiniest car on the road at that time.
It was a terrible car. I paid $350 for it, but I sold it for $700.
Wow.
So made money. Number 2 was a 1977 Ford F-150, two-wheel
Nice.
drive. And I bought it from a family friend. It was Wimbledon white. It was a great truck. I loved that, but it was two-wheel drive. My next was a 76 Chevy 3/4 ton pickup, four-wheel drive,
Wow.
long bed.
Nice.
And that, when I bought it, it was 13 different colors. When I sold it, it was white, really nice white color, and it had a really nice red interior. That truck was interesting because while having it, I put an overdrive transmission into it with the help of a fantastic family friend. But it was 2 inches longer, or I think it was about an inch longer than the transmission that we took out. So we had to make custom engine mounts to move the engine forward 3/4 of an inch so it would all fit and we didn't have to change drive shafts. So that was an interesting project. My next one was a 1990 Jeep YJ, white, didn't have air conditioning and it didn't have
Mine
power
was white
steering.
too. And neither did mine.
No, I put power steering in it though.
Did you?
Yeah. The next one was a 2006 LJ Rubicon. And the story with that Jeep was I bought it from a coworker, and she and her husband were huge Jeep nuts. And they used to do what was called Camp Jeep or Jeep Camp. And that's what they took this Jeep on, and she swore she would never, ever, 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 ever sell it. But one day she decided to sell it.
Oh.
And she said the only person she would sell it to would be me if I wanted it. And I said, are you kidding? Of course.
Yes, please.
So we did everything we could to get it. And I don't have that, of course, anymore. But my first Rubicon, it was a fantastic Jeep. It was like a khaki green color.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. The next one I had was my Grand Cherokee. It was a 2001. And that thing had so many modifications to make it workable. It had a transfer case swap, it had a rear axle swap, it had a 6-inch long arm kit, it had a V8, which was nothing but problems. Wow. But it was I liked it. It was a good Jeep. Yeah. And then, of course, now what I have is my 2014 Rubicon, and I love it. It's 2 doors, but it's fine. I love it. It's short wheelbase, and it's an awesome Jeep.
Yeah.
What got me into off-roading was basically the Boy Scouts. We had a leader who, both of our leaders, that basically decided that the coolest place to go camping was where other people couldn't go. Mm-hmm. So we all had four-wheel drive. They had all four-wheel drive, and that's where we went. And I like that idea of being able to use my vehicle to get places.
Yeah,
and that's,
that other people can't get to.
That's
what I love about off-roading.
And that's about the time I bought a four-wheel drive, so I could do that very thing.
Yeah.
And so that's how I got in. So 7 vehicles so far, and every single one of them has a different story.
Wow.
And I could sit here for an hour and tell you about every single one of them.
Really?
So I really loved it. So, okay, here's the last question. Now this one, some people are going to like me after this, I answer this, and some people are not going to like me after I answer this. So let me read the question to you. Okay, since we are in an election year and we all know how just important the election cycle might be, if you were running for an office and I, as an off-road enthusiast, was to ask you what is the one thing you were going to do for the off-road community to ensure our sport of years to come, what would you say? Well,
good question.
I have 4. You asked for 1, I gave you 4. These are 4 things that I would do. These are just my opinions. Some of you are going to like them, some of you aren't. Okay, number 1, everybody's going to love this one. I would put a moratorium on trail closures of all legal, documented, numbered, and mapped routes. However, there would be some exclusions on case-by-case basis, though, like seasonal closures, repair closures, private property cases, or any kind of like investigations or anything where they needed to close it. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, I would incentivize land agencies federally, like the National Forest or the Bureau of Land Management or State Trust or state parks, wilderness areas, and national parks to have organizations like Trail, the Tunnel Recreation Alliance. And it's important because these groups are great for volunteer work. repair, maintenance, cataloging of trails, and also being an ambassadors for vendors and other outside groups like Tread Lightly, Leave No Trace, trail cleanup businesses like Natural Restorations,
Yeah.
and also
Keep our desert clean.
Yep, and also for off-road training.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yes, it is.
And this one may not be so important. You may not like this one, but here's another one. No, this one will be okay. I think everybody will like this one. I would end commercial permitting for anything other than competitions or rallies or other events, but groups like Tread Lightly, Leave No Trace, and off-road trainers who are actually doing good for the community and the off-road community wouldn't have to apply for commercial permits. I think that we should have access to those lands for those reasons, but I think competitions and rallies and such, that might be a little bit different story.
Yeah.
And I take that back. Some of you might like that answer and some of you may not like that answer, but that's just my opinion. So, okay, here's the last one. I don't think this one's going to be popular, but again, this is just my idea. I am not opposed to gates being installed on all common OHV areas. And the reason for that, well, let me take it back. So areas like Bulldog, where they have gate codes, I'm not opposed to that.
Right.
I think that there should be a fee because it's important that if we're going to use those lands, we have to be responsible for maintaining them.
Yep.
And there must be a mandatory Tread Lightly course before that permit should be issued.
Yep.
Now that fee would be split 50-50 between the land agency and Tread Lightly. So not only is that going to go, some of that's going to go back to the land agency for maintenance and upkeep and whatever else, but we also have those volunteer group like Tread Lightly to work as an ambassadorship for the OHE community to build education, knowledge, and that sort of stuff. I think that's very, very important.
We don't lose our rights to the trails
Exactly.
by stupid behavior.
Yeah, yeah. And volunteer projects too. Like we have some of those Tread Lightly projects going on all the time, especially in Arizona and in Utah and that kind of stuff. And I think those are really, really important.
I agree.
Anyways, so those are my 4 points. So I know you only asked for one. I gave you 4. I hope you like them. And if you don't, that's okay. Just comment down below. That's just an opinion. That's all it is just an opinion. So, all right.
Okay.
I know we didn't get to all the questions, but I know we've burned through an hour.
Like that.
Just like that.
Right.
And it happens fast. So
I think we got through a lot of the good ones.
Yeah.
The ones where I have sincere questions.
Well, and there are other really good ones in here, like what should I keep in my vehicle for emergencies? What are sway bars? How much air pressure do I lower my tires down to? That's another question that's really important. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to that one. But, hey, maybe we do this again and we answer the rest of them.
Session 2.
I like it.
Yeah.
So, all right. So what'd you think?
Okay, wasn't as scary as I thought.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's just like having a good conversation between pals, right?
Right, except there's 3 cameras trained on us.
Yeah, that's true, but that's okay. Don't worry, I'll edit it so we look great.
Right.
Our hair looks nice.
Right.
Yeah, and then the makeup artist came in and fixed us up and touched us up.
I was going to say, where's the hair and makeup team?
Yeah, we're going to look great. So, well,
Photoshop.
I think, Elizabeth, this was a great idea. I'm glad you brought it up, and I hope you didn't get too shocked when I said, that's a great idea. When are you available?
Oh, God.
So, awesome. Anything else you want to add before we finish up? Because we're just about done.
Everybody that's watching this, look at the Right Line channel. You can learn a whole lot from Chad. I have learned a whole lot from Chad. He's one of the few people I trust to be a trail leader and a teacher, educator.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's nice of you to say.
Oh, you're welcome.
And if you like what you saw, make sure that you give me a like down below if you did like it. If you don't, that's okay. Make sure you comment down below if there's anything else you'd like to add or something I left out, and that could be the case. I can't remember everything. Do a share if you don't mind, and subscribe. And if you really like what you saw, consider one of my 2 memberships, my early access membership and my off-road training membership. You can click that join button and find out all the information down below. So Elisabeth, thanks for having me in your home, and thanks for coming on the podcast. I liked the heck out of this. I thought it was great, and we'll definitely have to do it again.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joseph in the chair. All right, thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on the next one. All right.
Woot.
Bye.
Woot. Okay. I didn't die.